because there's inequality, and I'm going to stand up against it.
Should there be, I mean, some responsibility in terms of to communicate? Should there be, therefore, a list of demands, or is that not, does that not serve the cause?
I don't think so. I think that...
You don't think they should or should not be?
They should not be. I think they've done it right. First of all, you know, I just want to reiterate Amy's point that the non-hierarchical structure is part of its brilliance. It avoids the kind of cults of personality that plagued all of the movements in the 60s. And it gives everybody, it's cumbersome. I mean, these General Assemblies can sort of drag on and on and on. But it gives everybody a sense of empowerment, and it makes it very difficult for the authorities to decapitate it. There are undercover cops down there, and aside from the fact that it's like a bad Doonesbury cartoon where they all look like cops, the other tip-off is they're all walking around saying, well, so who do you think the core leadership is? Where are the leaders? Well, first of all, it's completely transparent. You don't need to be an undercover cop. You can wear your uniform and go to the General Assembly, as many uniformed cops around the park do, and hear every word that's uttered and every decision that's made. And I think that that transparency and that non-hierarchical structure is really brilliant and gives it a kind of resiliency, and they rotate. You know, people will assume positions to facilitate, and they'll change so that nobody accumulates too much power. You know, I think that it's more that this group recognizes that the formal structures of power are tone deaf. And I spent a lot of time talking about this in Death of the Liberal Class, but the ability to carry out piecemeal and incremental reform, which is what liberal institutions do. You know, when Conrad Black wrote his biography of Roosevelt, he said that Roosevelt's greatest achievement was that he saved capitalism. And I think that's right. That when there is a breakdown, liberal institutions provide a kind of safety valve. Well, the corporate state, in its myopia and idiocy, thought it could dispense with the liberal class. And therefore, there is no way to appeal to the system. It doesn't matter what the citizens want. There was no popular support for the FISA Reform Act, which retroactively made legal what under our Constitution is illegal, the warrantless wiretapping, monitoring, and eavesdropping of tens of millions of Americans. There was no popular support for the bailout. Constituent calls were 100 to 1 across the political spectrum, but of course Goldman Sachs wanted it. And that is the bottom line. There is no way to vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs. And so when you shut that safety valve off, you create movements that seek to tear down a monolithic and tone-deaf and callous power structure. And that's precisely what's happened. Now, within that movement, I think it's appropriate for teachers and firefighters and students to make demands. But I think that the ability of the movement to, and of course that has great symbolic value being where it is, at the gates of Wall Street, has realized that if we don't tear down the structure of the corporate state, it doesn't really matter what we do.
Does it have anything in common with the Tea Party?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. When the people gathered on September 16th and 17th, what, 2,000 people, hardly any coverage they got. If it was 2,000 Tea Party activists who had gathered on Wall Street, I dare say there would have been 2,000 reporters there, if not more. I think probably a number of people in the Tea Party are listening or watching, because there are a lot of the same concerns. This
about
is
the power of corporate America.
Yes,
and
the people feeling disempowered. I mean, I think this is not...
the power of Washington even, too.
Absolutely. And also there's a connecting with people all over the globe. This is a reaction to corporate globalization, not globalization overall, because there's a kind of grassroots globalization that's happening that we've never seen before. The protests are in the Philippines, the protests are in Egypt, they're in England, they're in Ireland, they're in Iceland. It is truly remarkable, in addition to Latin America and right here in the United States. And I mean, the young people, that what they are learning right now, as they talk to each other and talk to people who come down to Occupy Wall Street. The other night I was there, and John Carlos came. He was, let's go back decades, Mexico City, puts up his hand in the Black Power salute. He and Tommy Smith, they won the bronze and the gold medal in the 200-meter dash. They put up their hands in the fist. He also wore beaded necklace to protest lynching. and they didn't wear their shoes, and they rolled up their pants because they wanted to protest poverty in this country. He came to Wall Street, to the Occupy encampment, and saluted the people who were there, that there is a movement that continues. And at the same time this all is going on, you have the dedication of the monument of Dr. Martin Luther King in Washington, D.C. Where would he be right now? Would he have been standing with President Obama as Dr. King was being honored? Or would Dr. King have actually been with Cornel West in front of the Supreme Court protesting the contamination of politics by money? Would he be in the middle of the Wall Street encampment with everyone else protesting war and protesting poverty?
Well, he died in Memphis where he was protesting poverty.
That's right.
And
he was standing up for unionized sanitation workers.
Yeah, and so you think clearly that the answer to that is obviously be here.
Oh, I think there's no question.
Yeah. And President Obama made that link as well. And there is some, I mean, are political groups going to try to sort of ride, you think, this understanding that it has power and therefore want to associate with it?
Well, whatever people want to do, at this moment I don't think these encampments can be used because there is such a freshness, there is such a decentralization of power. People can learn from them, and I think that the people who are gathered in Wall Street at the encampment as well as other places are reaching out to learn from those who've organized before. But they're also moving forward in this new era.
Is there a sense that that finally there is attention, that the mainstream media is finally paying attention?
Well, there's also grassroots media, and that's very important there. There is a media center. They're getting out their own images all over the world. They are, I mean, Democracy Now! Has been there from the beginning, even at the organizing meetings before, where people understand they have to define their own narrative. And it's also very important to see how the police are dealing with this. I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned. Well, at the beginning it was atrocious when you had police officers pepper spraying young women, blindsiding them, no warning, no provocation.
And many have said that gave momentum to the movement.
Absolutely. And more than 700 people were arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge. That was one of the largest mass arrests in U.S. history. As a journalist myself who was arrested covering protest at the Republican Convention in 2008 and brought suit against the cities of the police in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the Secret Service for ripping off our press credentials, we just won a landmark settlement. And we held our news conference announcing this. And part of it is a training of the St. Paul police officers in how they deal with the media. We held our news conference.
They had to train their officers to deal better.
And that's happening right now. We held a news conference at Occupy Wall Street because we see what's happening. When police tell people to turn off their video cameras, that's exactly when they have to turn their video cameras on. Accompanying this movement, we need media in this country that allows people to speak for themselves. Ultimately, I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth.
All right. This also, I mentioned the book, Chris, Death of the Liberal Class, which you had mentioned earlier. I also, while mentioning this, also forward by Bill Moyers, Breaking the Sound Barrier by Amy. So there is, in terms of some of the programs that one of the programs that we did here, a sense that people ask this question: we've been waiting for this to happen. Do you have a feeling that that's an accurate assessment? People were looking for somebody to start, in the same way that there was an immolation that started the Arab Spring in Tunisia.
Yeah, I think, in fact, it's been something that has been happening for some time, but it's been off the radar screen. It didn't just begin in Zuccotti Park. It's ongoing. And it has been ongoing, but now it's finally erupted. And what's fascinating about the media is I think there's a parallel with the 1960s, where they just were asleep at the switch. They weren't doing their job. The New York Times, which is, I mean, it's a subway ride away, would send a reporter down there. They'd take one look around and walk back and write these sort of snarky, condescending articles, which they'd never do, by the way, to the Tea Party, because the political cost is too high. But because there is no left, in essence, organized left, one can ridicule movements like this.
So is this
without
a replacement of the organized left, in a sense, by
I think it's
something different?
It's a populist movement, clearly, and I think it's very different from the Tea Party. I think the Tea Party has very disturbing elements that I would call fascist. It, first of all, targets government and corporations, and it's, of course, bankrolled by the most retrograde capitalists in the country, the Koch brothers and others. It targets government because corporations want government to become more anemic. It speaks in the language of violence and the gun culture. It directs rage, and it's a legitimate rage. These people have a right to feel betrayed, but they direct that rage towards the vulnerable, towards Muslims, towards undocumented workers, towards homosexuals, towards intellectuals, all of the sort of classic rubric that one finds in a kind of fascist movement. So while I think that the groundswell of anger that one sees in the Tea Party is genuine, I think the way it's directed is radically different from this movement. The channeling of that kind of anger, especially towards scapegoats, is something that frightens me.
There's no question now that it has enough momentum, enough support to be sustainable. And that the protests continue through the winter?
I mean, it's going to be hard, but people are very dedicated. And I think that the organized parties, the Democratic and Republican Party, are running scared. I mean, you have President Obama, who is elected by mass movements in this country. The anti-war movement, I mean, the major difference between Obama and Clinton was that he was opposed to the Iraq War. Now he is responsible for the surge in Afghanistan and the continuation of that war. Immigrants' rights movement had great hope for President Obama. He's now presided in his tenure as president over the largest mass deportations in history. More than 1 million people have been deported in his presidency. He promised to close Guantanamo. Guantanamo remains open. And he has surrounded himself by those who represent Wall Street, from Larry Summers to Tim Geithner, and people all see this. And that's how it's President Obama who himself who has united, like President Bush did, people in many movements against him. And this is why the Democrats and the Republicans are very concerned. You see the Republicans changing, too. At first, they were not accepting this movement. You know, Gandhi said it, and I'll paraphrase it. You know, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win. And we're moving forward in that process.
And what do you expect of President Obama?
What do I expect? How do I expect him to respond to this? For me, looking at this as a journalist, I am much more interested in movements and how movements respond. I don't think any of this is about one person. You know, I think the world heaved a sigh of relief when he was elected. For so long, people felt they were hitting their heads against brick walls. Now that wall was a door. The door was open a crack, and the question was, would it be kicked open or slammed shut? But that kicking open is the responsibility of movements, not one person. You know, if he's sitting in the Oval Office and those who are used to having the ear of the most powerful person on earth are whispering in his ear, if he can't point out the office window of the Oval Office and say, if I do that, they will storm the Bastille. If there's no one out there, he's in big trouble. And sometimes he may not want anyone out there, but it sure looks like the crowds are gathering. They're informed, they're concerned, and they're determined.
Thank you.